Greetings, and after a holiday Thanksgiving hiatus, we're back with another edition of the River Radio Sports Central podcast, powered by our friends at NovaCare Rehabilitation, alongside Matt Varney from 103.5 ESPN. I'm Darren Kinnard, and Matty V, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and always a tremendous time of the year, both for family, food, and football.
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope the same for you. But yeah, it was great weekend, and we had a lot to talk about over the weekend, and well, now we're here.
A lot to digest, if you will.
That's better to say.
Right,
yeah,
I'm here all week, folks. But I mean, we put to bed the high school football season in Illinois, and this weekend sparked a debate I haven't seen in a long time statewide.
Right,
and that is the public-private debate, and it became a front and center story when 7 of the 8 state championships went to private schools, the 8th being East St. Louis, who is not your quintessential public school in that regard. And the weekend started with Althoff just absolutely pounding Lena Winslow, a traditional 1A power, and there had been a lot of questions all year. Well, why is Althoff in 1A? Why is, Deer Hill, who's going to Oregon, showed why. I mean, he sets a 1A record. He ends up with 7 touchdowns and over 500 total yards. But the disparity of a team with 9 Division I players against a 1A, again, a 1A power.
Right.
Lena Winslow is a 1A power. That really set the table for what was going to happen the rest of the weekend.
Yeah, we kind of saw immediately what was going to happen. The game wasn't even over, and people were already complaining all across the state. And I remember I sent you a text and a couple other people saying, well, sure, the one time that the 618 gets to, enjoy this a little bit, the rest of the state has an issue with it. And, I mean, to the credit of the rest of the area, a lot of people from the area, which in past years, Southern Illinois seems to be the one that's complaining the most about this. We have valid reasons for it, but a lot of them still complained about Althoff. Said Lena Win should have probably been the one that gets the win here, but they got in a bad situation. But Althoff, yeah, they started it off, and we could just kind of see the dam was already showing cracks at the end of the first quarter, and just by the end of that first game, everyone in the state was like, well, get ready for the rest of the weekend, I guess.
And a lot of, Althoff has had some baggage in the past.
Yeah.
They were in the South 7 for a lot of years, and there were some rough patches there. And, some of the folks down here are like, well, look, this is kind of what we were dealing with all year. But it doesn't really change, basically the way the table was set up and the fact that, Althoff's got a bunch of guys from a bunch of different schools that come in and lead them to a state title. And because they hadn't had enough success, they were able to apply for the waiver to get rid of the 1.65 multiplier. And so their enrollment puts them in 1A, and that's where they are.
Well, and I didn't realize just how easy it was to get a waiver. Honestly, I think it was, 2 years without a playoff win or something like that. I don't know if I agree with that short of a time frame and all the leniencies that's given to a private school. The waiver's there for a reason, and Althoff, I think, was kind of the quintessential reason of, they've struggled really hard in several years, not even just recent years, but several years. So they're kind of the reason it's there. But then you have other schools like Sacred Heart Griffin, I think, is going to be able to apply for that waiver at the end of this year. So it's there for a reason, but it gets abused, I think, in a lot of situations. Althoff, again, they're the reason why it's there, so they can have an opportunity. But then, you see them in a situation where not only do they get that waiver, but they get to then dominate through 1A. They make the postseason, and they just run roughshod through it with a fantastic roster. I get why people are complaining. And again, I don't like exactly maybe the situation that the waiver sets up. I don't disagree that it probably should be there for the right situation, but for a lot of these private schools, it wasn't the right situation, and they got it anyways.
Yeah, then when you looked at 2A, 3A, 4A, those were the teams that we had seen in some capacity. Maroa Forsyth in 2A, Monticello in 3A, then Mount Zion in 4A. those games were all routes. Now, I saw those three teams really struggling because they all chucked it around.
Yeah.
That was, and when you looked at the forecast for Bloomington Normal for Friday and Saturday, frigid conditions, windy conditions, which it's always windy, and snow. And none of those things are conducive to the passing game. So I thought they would struggle. I did not think that they would all get whacked like they did.
Right.
And that, again, fed the fire of the complaints coming out.
Without a doubt. And, I mean, also just with that point in the year, usually, if it's going to be cold, which it almost always is, you need some sort of a run game. So even with or without, the private school just beating them into the ground, basically, I think they would have had a tough time either way just because of the fact that, you need a run game as well. And if you build it around passing and then build inward, it doesn't really work well usually, unless you're talking about maybe like an 8A school or something. But, the weather didn't play a great factor for things. But then, you add in the private school factor and just, they really didn't have a chance.
And so I saw a lot of discussion because I don't know anything about Chicago Christian.
Right. Me neither.
But, Maroa beat them last year in the first round of the playoffs, and this was essentially the same team. So it was a different storyline than the 1A with Althoff, that this was a quote-unquote homegrown team. Now, I don't know where all their kids came from, but it wasn't quite the same as some of the other situations. And they, and I saw Maroa the week before against Johnson City, and to see somebody beat them 47-0 was a little shocking.
Yeah.
But again, it didn't quite set up the same as Althoff in 1A and some of the others down the road, and Montini in 3A and those type of things.
Yeah. Well, and Maroa Forsyth, while still very good this year, they definitely weren't running the table like they normally do, anyways. So that kind of set them up for, they probably were coming in a little bit more bruised than they usually are when they go to a state title game, which is crazy to say. But they usually, when they make it to the state title game, just run right through everybody. And you got to remember, they were playing their starters in the quarterfinals up to the end. Semifinals, they had a little bit easier time. They were able to relieve some of those guys later in the game. But it wasn't like every single game leading up to the state title game that Maroa Forsyth was able to say, okay, it's halftime. We'll put you out there for a series. And then you come out like they usually do when they go to the state title game.
5A was private versus private, so you knew somebody was going to win it. 6A was public versus public, and again, East Side is the winner. Again, they're not your typical public school, but and they play up a class. They choose to play up a class. And then in 7A and 8A, it was kind of the same old story. Chicago Mount Carmel wins, Loyola Academy wins. Yeah. And I believe it was the Mount Carmel coach had some of the, and there could have been other comments out there, but some of the quotes I thought were as tone deaf of the situation as I've ever heard. And it was an ultimate, we're number one finger at a lot of people. And it was, one comment was, hey, we're playing this team that's been together since they're 5, and, I get these guys for 4 years, and, no, don't try to get a sob story here. And the other one is just the comment that these kids were all recruited here. And, private enables, people to have the 30-mile radius. It doesn't include recruiting, right? But to come out and blatantly say that's a little disturbing.
Yeah, without a doubt, and I hope the IHSA takes a look at that, because it's the quiet part out loud. That everybody knows it, the IHSA knows it, but they're kind of like, hey, don't say anything. And the fact that something was said after a state title game, that's pretty damning right there. And but yeah, I mean, every high school coach really gets only 4 years with their guys. Now, granted, they may not have the immediate chemistry walking in, but with that level of play, you're probably not starting most of those freshmen anyway, so they can build that chemistry up in year 1 and 2. So then when you do start them as a junior or a senior, it's basically the same thing. So I don't understand that comment one bit. I understand where he's trying to come from, but no, that's just trying to shovel dirt on top of it, really.
So we get to the okay, what's next?
Yeah.
Where does this go? And we know that nothing's going to come out of this upcoming season's legislative session, because the amendment that was put forth by Williamsville that would address this was not even advanced to the ballot.
Right.
And I've seen, again, social media has been on fire with people complaining. And the one thing I said, well, I've seen a lot is that, there's a bunch of private schools that are blocking this. There's blah, 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 blah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the legislative committee has 31 public schools out of the 35 members.
Right.
Okay. The board is 10 public school members out of 12. And again, I think that it's important to note the IHSA makes very clear we are not a governing body. In fact, that we're not a legislative body. We're not making the rules. We're enforcing the rules that the membership has driven. And so with 3 times as many public schools as private schools, my deal is figure it out or quit complaining about it. You either got to deal with it or you got to, you've got to get better.
Right, exactly. And there's a whole process. And, you can definitely go and contact the people that are sitting at the board. But when it gets down to it, there's things like town halls that this is important to you. You got to go. You got to show support. Because I guarantee you, if you show up, everyone that shows up is going to say, yes, we want this proposal one way or not. Williamsville's, I think, addressed just about everything and had as close to as a perfect solution as possible. And the fact it didn't make it out of the legislative session just goes to show that people didn't show up to the town halls, didn't show the support that they need. And people got to be better about making sure people know about the town halls and that you got to go to support this thing. It's not just okay, we're going to do this. No one shows up. It's okay. We did our. You got to show up and you got to show your support for this, without a doubt.
And basically, these are the straw polls. Because then from the town halls, they go back to the legislative committee and, hey, did this have support or not?
Right.
And, there apparently was not enough support to get it on the ballot so that it gets out in front of all 800 plus schools. And so therein lies the problem. What has been the reason that the side with 3 times as many voters can't even get it to the ballot? And, I'm not naive enough to think that there's not some pushback or whatever but I'm not going to lie in the weeds with the conspiracy theories and all this and that. And, because at the end of the day, it is a member driven organization and there are 600 public schools. Figure out how to get it on the ballot and to get it changed. And I agree with you, just from what I didn't go in and plug in a bunch of numbers, but the Williamsville proposal, my understanding of it is they took the 30-mile radius and they took all the enrollments of those schools in that radius and then, averaged it. And I think they cut it in half and averaged it.
Yeah, potentially.
And somebody had done the math on Althoff. And it would have put them at a school of 1,200.
That's about right.
Which is where they have been in the past when they used to do the football enrollment based on, okay, your enrollment is either what you've got or it's the average of who you play.
Right.
And so Althoff was always in that 4A to 5A, depending on where it was. And 1,200 would have put them right there.
And I really think that's probably the best solution. Another one that I have heard that I think would honestly not go well for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. But I've heard some people say, okay, treat it like a co-op, basically. If they would have gone to this one, you pull that entire... Because that's what a lot of co-ops, you get, okay, you have 2 players on the team, but you take the whole enrollment. Right. You could do that, but I think that would cause more issues. I think that the proposal put forth by Williamsville, I think that was the closest you're going to get to finding a solution, aside from just completely separating them. But I don't think you want to do that. As much as other states do that, I think you want to have the private schools involved in the same one, because then you do get to crown a true state champion, rather than saying, okay, well, what if the private school met with the public school? It's going to create kind of a what if that the box is open. You can't go ahead and put it back in the box. It's already out there. Let's find a way to make this work as it already is. And that's what people have to do. But again, you have to support this through the legislative session. You can't just say, well, I want this, and then forget about it for a year.
Well, yeah, you can't go complain about it at the kitchen table and or today on social media, and then not do the work. And we have a lot of people that want to complain, and not a lot of people that want to do the work. And so I'm glad you brought up, because one of the solutions that's out there is, well, they should have their own class, and that way they could just play each other. And I think, in my mind, that's the last, that would be the last option. Right, yeah.
If you can't figure anything else out, okay, you go that route.
I think it's important to get the classes corrected. Yes. Now, what do you do in 8A, a Loyola Academy? You can't make them any bigger. You start them down 14 point, you know what I'm saying? There's not much, but then again, they're playing schools of 2,500 plus.
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's only so much you can do there.
You could make more classes, but it's just going to water things down, and it's going to create issues down the road eventually again. It will happen. It might solve the problem for 5 years, but it's a Band-Aid. It's not a pure solution. So, yeah, you definitely could, but it's not going to solve it in the long run. So we have to figure out, okay, you have 8 classes. How do we combine everybody and make it work? And 8A is just a mammoth. You have future NFL players playing in 8A. It is what it is. And there's some schools that are going to not have any future NFL players playing on their teams, but they're just really good. They're nitty-gritty type of teams that might find their way to a state title game, and then they run into a team that's got 14 future NFL players on there, maybe an NFL Hall of Famer one day, and you just have to deal with the fact that, that's just how good the team is sometimes.
It's just interesting to me, because you've got a situation where, I recognize this system is not equitable. No. It is not fair for the situations. But the same people that were against going to 4 classes, many of the same people that were against going to 4 classes for basketball and the like, or even expanding from 6 to 8 in football, saying that it waters it down, will give everybody trophies. Yeah. Well, if you take the private schools out, are you truly, as you said, the state's champion? Right. In that class? And that's why I advocate for getting the classification corrected, get them in the right spot, get Althoff in the 4A. Could they have won 4A? Perhaps.
Yeah, maybe.
Perhaps. But they weren't gonna be seeing Joliet Catholic or Joliet Catholic was 5A, but they're not going to be seeing somebody, because those privates would be up as well. So I think that's where it's important. But I think the people that are lobbying for the separate classes got to understand. Okay, if you number one, it has to be at least 2 classes.
It has to,
because you cannot have a school of Althoff or Decatur St. Teresa having to play a Loyola Academy. I don't care, private or not. That's not fair. No. Number 2, that puts all the publics in 6 classes now.
Correct. Yeah.
And now you're back to the kind of the old school days where those classes are a lot bigger.
Right.
Are you okay with that? And then the other part of that is when you go to the other sports, 4-class sports, if you don't add a class, well, now all of a sudden basketball for public schools is a 2-class sport.
That's correct, yeah.
And I don't know if the small schools that are in 1A are going to be like, I don't know if I want to do that.
Right, exactly. Well, and the other side of it is, how do you seed it? Because now you're going to have even more teams that normally wouldn't make it into the postseason that are going to get in. And it'll be great for these 4 and 5 teams, hypothetically, because you're going to see a lot more 4 and 5s. You might see a 3-win team make it into the postseason that way. And is that what you really want in your postseason? Also, do you want a 3-win team making it into? Probably not. Chicago has their Super League where the 3 wins and 4 wins can continue to play. In terms of a state championship, it'd be fun, but for a run for a team like that. But at the same time, you're going to probably go up against a 9-0 team. It's not going to be fun for anyone in the first round. So I don't know what that solution is going to get you, because you're going to get a lot of 4 and 5 and potentially a 3 and 6 team going in.
And that was, and before I venture too far, that was another complaint that I heard was about the seeding process and that, we've got to seed it 1 through 32. And I think that's complete and utter nonsense. There's, first of all, the way the seeding process, while not perfect in any stretch of the imagination, it is the only non-subjective way that it can be done.
Right.
And, I think that we've seen with the seeding processes in other sports that, and that's in a small, just in a particular sectional complex where you've got 25 teams or whatever, you're seeding a handful versus trying to seed the whole state.
Right.
I mean, and because nobody sees everybody, and I just, and then when you looked at 7 and 8A, you've got double digit seeds playing in the state championship game. So it's not like, because they already do 1 through 32 and 7 and 8A, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get the top 2 teams in the state. And this fallacy, and it raged for years in college football, that we've got to have the top 2 teams. Well, that's not the way it works. In any other sport, you're not guaranteed. That's why there's a playoff system.
Right.
That's why there's a bracket. Whoever's left standing after the bracket or after the playoffs, they're the champion, period.
Yes, without a doubt. And, I mean, they seed 1 to 32 and 7A and 8A because they are just that close to each other.
Right.
And I know people kind of wave off when they almost went 1 to 32 in the other 6 classes. And then because of gas prices and the pandemic happening, they said, we're going to hold off on that. And that was the right decision. And I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people in the first round, they still see someone that's an hour, 2 hours away with the system it currently is. But go ahead and ask Carbondale or Marion a few years ago about having to travel to Kankakee in the first round. Or Murfreesboro this year about having to go to Macomb in the first round. That is not what you want to do. It happens because that's just how the state gets split up sometimes, but it should be a rarity. It should not be happening for half of the first round games where you have to travel 4, 5, 6 hours. That is a quarterfinal trip.
Right.
And I don't want to see the abolishment of conferences, but I'm very much for seeing us make kind of districts so the first 2 rounds have a little bit more levity to them of you could win your district, kind of like a regional type of situation. So then also everybody keeps it a little bit closer to home somehow. I don't know how exactly that would be worked. That's for smarter people than me. But when you get down to it, that at least then keeps things closer, and then you can move on to the further out. If you want to see Murfreesboro or Benton or Chesterfield or somebody travel 5 hours or 6 hours or I don't think you could do 7 in Illinois. Maybe if you're moving at 50 miles an hour.
Massac.
Fair enough.
Massac to Gurney,
Rockford or something.
Geneseo.
Yeah. So if you want to see Massac County travel 7 hours when they finally make the postseason for the first time in forever, okay, yeah, sure. But that's not fair to the Patriots in that situation. It's not fair to these other teams saying, yeah, it's no big deal. It's not even about the gas money. It's about the fact that in their first round, you shouldn't be traveling that far.
Well, and my question was when that all came out a couple years ago is what is the expectation for a reasonable expectation that a team should travel and play on game day?
Right.
And my thing is 4 hours should be maximum.
I agree.
And then if you're talking anything over 4 hours, now you're talking not only is it a charter bus, it's hotels,
yes.
It's meals, it's all that stuff. And suddenly you've put schools in financial burdens, and for what gain?
Exactly.
And that's my point. But
makes no sense.
That's not necessarily a public-private debate. That's just something else that kind of spawned during this postseason. I heard it a lot, and then I heard it more after this as well. We've got to fix public-private, and we've got to seed it 1 through 32. And I think that's nonsense.
I think the 1 through 32 almost comes more from the public crowd or the private crowd or the people that want to see it remain that way, and they say, well, seed it 1 through 32, so then, as you said, you get the best ones because the privates will presumably get higher seeds and everything. And but that's not, as you said, that's not necessarily how it's going to work. You'll have the 22 seed make a run, and they all of a sudden are in the finals.
Well, and I think a lot of people in 2A thought Quincy, Notre Dame, and Moreau Forsyth were perhaps 1 and 2. and then Chicago Christian, Maroa Forsyth beats Quincy, and then Chicago Christian beats Maroa by 47. So
Right.
I mean that's and not to dig into wounds for Maroa Forsyth, but now back to the side effects of this is again, if you went to public or two private classes in the 4 class, I think you would have to add and make it a 5-class system, have 3 public and 2 private. And again, we saw the gnashing of teeth when we went from 2 to 4. Oh, by golly, just give everybody a trophy and yada yada yada. Well, I mean, if you want two private classes, are you okay with adding another class in general?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, but I think that I don't think it's palatable to go all of a sudden there's only going to be two public classes. I just don't think that'll get the support needed to go any further.
No, I don't think so. And I do think at that point it'll probably become watered down. And I'm not necessarily an advocate against watering things down. I like seeing more teams having an opportunity to win that ultimate championship. But I think the way that we're talking about the 4-class system, I think it's the way it's set up is probably about as close to perfect as you could get. Football, I think you do need those more classes, but all the other sports, 4 classes, that's about all you need in the basketballs and the volleyballs and the like. And then 3 classes for, cross country and wrestling and everything. It all makes sense, the way that it's all set up. But it will then, there will be a trickle down effect, as you're mentioning. If we're just looking to try to fix football, and then all of a sudden we have a trickle-down effect for basketball and volleyball and wrestling. It's going to affect everything. You'll have to add another class for everything.
Well, before the football stuff came to a head, we saw, Chris Lucas, the Carmine White County volleyball coach, make some very public statements about getting it fixed. He saw it firsthand last year, and it happened again this year. He was the only public school last year to make 2A, and they finished 4th this year. They were a whisker away from being all 4 private schools in the semifinals at 2A. And again, the 3 privates go 1, 2, 3. The public school gets 4th. And I don't, I'm not saying that somebody has the right to win a state championship. I mean, that's not the way it works. I mean, but you have the right to play somebody that's at least on the level playing field.
Yes, absolutely. If you're basically shoving people into something because that's where they go, it doesn't necessarily help the teams that are actually supposed to be there, and I think that goes back to the waiver a little bit about why did we see all these private schools make Final Fours and everything, and there be one or no public schools. Part of that is the waiver. Part of it's also the nature of the beast of a private school, but part of it's also the waivers. And so I think when you go back to it, the waiver's the first thing you got to fix, and then you got to find a way to keep it 8 classes in football, 4 classes in everything else, the 3 classes, the 2 classes, however the sport has it, each sport individually. But you got to keep the classes the same, but find a way to make sure that where the kids are supposed to be is where they're supposed to be.
And those 3-class sports are just incredibly difficult because it's a widespread. Anyway, Benton has been, and other teams that would be 2A, in a 4-class system, and they're 2A in a 3-class system. Well, now you're going in enrollments from, roughly 500 to 1,400.
Exactly.
And that's too big of a span, and so what you can't just have one. I mean, there is an enormous amount to this, and this has been a problem for a long time. I don't want to. I see a lot of the private school fans' reaction to this is get better. Well, that's easy to say when you're when your best players are people from other schools, so. That's a tone deaf thing. Be in the right class, and then if you win, I'm fine with it.
It's pretty easy to say that to somebody when you're going to turn around in a couple months and offer their star quarterback a nice tuition and say, you can come over here and you'll get a nice education, you'll get set up for college. And meanwhile, that school is now scrambling and saying, well, all we have is a freshman and a sophomore, and neither of them are quite ready to open up the whole playbook. It's very easy to say that at the moment, but it's really unfair when you look at it.
And it's easy to say that from the throne.
Yes.
And the other part is just the fact that you've got that situation where, again, if you're competing with the schools that you should be and you still win, again, kudos to you.
Yeah, no
Hat
problem.
tip, and that's why I feel like you got to get the enrollment stuff figured out. And again, the other thing that was kind of the perfect storm this year was DePaul College Prep.
Mm-hmm.
This is a school that has exploded enrollment-wise, but because of the IHSA's enrollment classification cycle being every 2 years, this ended up being a school of 1,300 playing a school of 700 in 4A, and 1,300 with the multiplier since they won. They may be 7A next year.
They just might be. Yeah, I mean, the IHSA's hand might be forced here. They really don't have a choice at this point, and the classification system, I think, is the big thing that needs to be looked at very intently. And maybe you can do your 2-year cycle in the future, but for the time being, maybe you need to sit down and say, for the next couple of years, we maybe need to just cycle every single year. I don't know. There's a lot of people that are smarter than me, as I said, that are going to find a better solution. But I also don't know if a lot of the solutions that we've seen from people are the right solutions either.
And, again, this has been a problem in multiple sports, in other, boys and girls, and it's never gotten the full push, all the pitchforks and,
which is bizarre.
But with the way things happened in football, good, bad, right, or wrong, football and basketball drive the bus, whether it's college, whether it's high school. And so now, as a public school fan, you may have thought that this weekend looked bad, and it would have been, this may be what spurs change.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the only thing you can really hope for.
And talking to the private school fans, my big question to them is, we watch a Super Bowl, and when it turns into a blowout, everybody flips off the channel. Unless it's your school, it's your team, you don't care at that point. How can you have fun steamrolling everybody? And again, okay, Loyola Academy, you're in the top class, so it is what it is for them. But everybody else, how can you have fun watching your team just steamroll through everybody and pick up a 48-0 win or whatever it ends up being? Don't you want to see your kids go through a little bit of adversity? And
no,
apparently not.
No, I mean, and that's again.
Put a good game forward is what I want to see.
Because all they want to say is, well, quit whining and get better. And it's not actually whining; it's just wanting a level playing field. And and again, you've got those situations where, I think they've got to get the enrollment part figured out. My personal opinion is they put the multiplier in, the 1.65, and I don't think they gave it enough years to track it, to tweak it, and then all of a sudden they come back in with 4 classes, and and honestly, 4 classes in those sports has kind of exacerbated the problem in a lot of ways, because you got so many small private schools now that are able to take care of business in 1A where they were not even around, and so we've seen a proliferation of the small schools, and that ends up being a problem. And then the smaller elephant, or maybe it's equal sized elephant in the room, is, okay, if you make these rules for private schools, what are you going to do about the non-boundaries?
Correct.
And the non-boundaries, basically, there are places in the state where you can go to school wherever whichever school you want, and that's, some would say that's the case in the Metro East. We know that's the case in Chicago and some other areas. How do you deal with that? And so that's yet another portion of this. Again, I go back to East St. Louis. They petitioned up. They voluntarily go up.
Yep, they do.
And so to see maybe compare it to Althoff. And Althoff going, no, we're good in 1A.
Yeah.
We're and that goes back to what you just said about beating the crap out of people. And, so again, and I think Eastside would go up too if their conference would let them. And I think that was part of the deal that they couldn't. So, again, I think that's the key, is get that fixed. again, just to, I don't think the separate classes is the right answer.
I agree. Whenever they figure it out, I have a feeling it'll be about 20 to 25 page document, though, that we'll have to sift through. Because, yeah, there's a lot of things that you don't think about, the non-boundary stuff like that. There's so many things that go into fact here. When you're in a big state like Illinois, people forget how big Illinois is. It's a big state. There's a lot of different regions and different rules for different areas and everything. When you're in a state like this, yeah, this is the type of stuff that's going to come up, and you got to find a way to solve it. When the IHSA started and was doing all this stuff in the 70s, it may not have been as big of an issue. It's become a big issue now, and it's time someone sat down with whoever they need to sit down with and say, let's make a 37-page document or whatever, and cover all our bases, and it has to be done eventually.
And then that's the thing is that, and I know there had been some discussions about getting a group to study the options and all this and that. And I think that might be some of the frustration is that, that, hey, the IHSA may not make the rules,
right? But
you need to put in place, get the people that it all affects, leaders, the smart people, as
right.
you say, in a room, and that we can figure out an equitable proposal or solution to this that, it's not going to go all of a sudden tilt it one way or
right.
the other.
Yeah. And you and I both have kind of, I wouldn't say given the IHSA a pass, but we recognize that it's not really their responsibility to put this forward. But what they can do as a body is to look at what happened this past weekend and say, yeah, we probably don't want that happening every single year, which is the way it's going to trend if they don't do anything. And they could say, let's put a group together, and maybe after 2 years of research and everything and observing, maybe they can come up with a couple ideas and we can look and see if we like any of them. They can do that. That could be something that they could responsibly do while other schools are also bringing forward proposals.
And again, I think that would be the way that, and then those people that are on the committees are going to be responsible for talking to their
yes.
individuals and going, okay, what do you think of this? And this is, and again, it's going to be a long process. I think it's going to be an interesting off season, but again, the way it's set up, there's no way it's going to change for next year, or even it's going to be really hard pressed to get something in for 2, because that Williamsville proposal was, to go into effect in 26, I believe.
Right,
and so it was, there were some things that went into effect to kind of change it now. But I think to get the full thing, it had to go through a complete enrollment cycle.
And where the, proposals and voting falls, it's kind of an unfortunate position for football specifically, because I think people forget about it a little bit. They move immediately on to basketball afterwards, and then to the spring sports after that. And then it's summertime, and people have maybe forgotten about it. They've gotten their, doe-eyed and everything, and they're like, oh, football's back finally, and they aren't thinking about, okay, in 15 weeks after the season starts, we're going to be right back where we started a year ago, but everyone has already forgotten about it because they moved on to the next thing. A couple people have to stick on this and, again, come up with a couple proposals, and then push it through, go to the town halls, and make sure it gets on the ballot.
And, and then if the vote, and however the vote goes, it goes. And, but again, we live in a time where people don't want to read.
Yeah, that's true.
And, if you've got an amendment and it's this big, and, and obviously if you're listening, you don't see this, but it's single space and small type. You're like, I don't really want to read that.
Yeah.
And so again, it's incumbent on the leaders of these schools, to make sure the knowledge is out there, to do the homework, if you're not going to do the homework, at least, these town halls are going to be in place that, they have to lay it out of why this is needed or why it's not needed, and go from there, and hopefully make an informed decision and carry on from there. But again, public schools have 3 times as many members as private. So if you're the public schools, my big question is, why haven't you been able to
Right.
get the rules changed?
And I mean, you and I talked about this last week about we didn't know really about the town hall situation for the most part. Make sure you're letting the media know. Make sure you get out the word about this stuff, because if no one knows about it, you'll hold it, and then there'll be zero support because no one shows up. So it's a whole interactive process here. Get everyone involved. If you're putting a proposal forward and you get through the legislative part, it goes to town hall, and then it has to go back to legislative. That town hall part, it's important to let your local media, whether it's you or I, or if it's somewhere up in Rockford or something, whoever your local media is, make sure they know so then they can put it out there and they can make sure that people can attend that, because it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think that those are not meant to be voluntary,
right?
You know, those for the school officials and that, and because they want the feedback, they want
do.
that. You know, this is the opportunity for each region to hold a time where they can talk about these things and maybe have a debate. Okay, is this good or bad, or what's this going to mean if this happens? And you know, when the district stuff came out, I didn't feel like there was enough information out there, and not, you know, so when schools had questions, well, what is this going to mean if ... Mm-hmm. There weren't answers out there.
That's why they reversed it,
and it never, you know, it didn't get any legs afterwards, and so. Again, it's going to be very interesting. It's certainly a debate that is raged for many years, and I suspect it's going to rage for at least a few more. And as you and I both know, no matter what the solution is, you know, it's going to make a bunch of people mad.
Oh yeah, not everyone's going to be happy.
No, and that's again that's not going to be the end result. You know, I mean, so you might as well not even shoot for that. But at the same point, you've got to be able to create something that's equitable. And equitable means being able to compete. It doesn't mean you have the right to win a state championship. You still have to go out and do the work to win it. But I shouldn't have to play, the monster that doesn't belong in my neighborhood.
I think a general rule when it comes to negotiations and deals is if everyone walks away feeling a little unhappy, it's probably a good deal. So whenever this solution hopefully comes in the next couple of years, hopefully, if you walk away saying, I don't know if I like that, it solves some of the problems, but that probably means that and then you talk to someone and says, well, I didn't like this. Okay, then this is probably a good solution when you get down to it.
And ultimately, it has to get back to this may not be best for me, but what's best big picture,
right? And
that is a tough sell in a lot of cases anymore.
And remember, it's when you come down to it, it's also what's best for the kids, because that's who's out there playing and competing for championships. And of course, you have the coaches as well, but the coaches will always tell you it's about the kids, and that's what this is too. And I know a lot of people, when they're arguing against the situation that is right now, they're thinking about the kids. But when you look at the proposal, you might say, well, hold on a minute, but ask yourself, is that for the kids? Because if it is, then it's good.
Well, that will put football to bed for the River Radio Sports Central podcast until something else comes out that we want to discuss. Basketball season has tipped off. We will have a ton of discussion about basketball in the coming weeks. Starting next week, we're going to do that next week, same time, same place. For Matty V, I'm Darren Kinnard. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll talk to you again next week.